Hi guys! I just finished taking Kirk Shinmoto's Costume Drawing Fundamentals class a couple months ago, and I am reporting back now. As with any of Kirk's classes, I highly recommend this one as well. In this video, I'm going to dive into my weekly homework and kind of give you guys a description of what I learned each week. So my main motivation for taking this class was that I like to draw people, and I've taken Kirk's analytical figure drawing class before, which focuses exclusively on the nude figure, but most of the figures that you encounter in real life are clothed people, so I just felt like I had really limited tools and processes when it came to drawing the clothed figure, besides just trying to copy what I see, and that's the biggest reason that I wanted to take this class to begin with. And I would say the biggest thing that I learned from the class is that the costume is not that different from anatomy, in that it's all about communicating the structure and gesture and underlying form of the figure. Before taking the class, I feel like I would get lost in every clothing fold as I tried to copy exactly the different angles and creases. But now when drawing folds, I spend a little time beforehand to analyze the construction of the clothing and tension points, and this helps me to better design and communicate the forms and gestures of the figure. Now let's go through the homework that I did for the class, and just as a side note, usually there's a lot more homework assigned than what you're gonna see from mine, usually double or triple. I modified the homework amount to fit the time that I had, and obviously you guys are free to do that as well if you're taking the class, but just wanted to put that out there in case anyone was wondering about the homework load or expectations for the class. Okay, so the homework for weeks 1 and 2 of this class are actually the same exact assignments as weeks 1 and 2 of Kirk's analytical figure drawing class, which I happened to take last summer. We spent the first 2 weeks going over the proportions and gesture of the figure and how to use shape, center lines, cylinders, and form to really communicate what the figure is doing. And having taken Kirk's figure class before, this time around, I feel like I actually understood the assignment a lot better compared to the first time that I did it. I'll actually show you guys my homework from last summer. So this was the homework from last summer, and as you can see in some of these, it feels like the legs are just kind of floating on their own, but in the homework from this time, I was actually attaching the legs to the pelvis. And the gesture drawings from last year, they actually took me around 10 to 20 minutes each figure, and I'm not even exaggerating. And comparing that to this time, I actually did these drawings in 1 minute or 3 minutes, depending on what the timer was set for the homework. So I felt like that was a huge difference. And the lines for my recent homework just look overall a lot looser compared to the first time that I did the homework, because the first time I did it, I just kept hitting the undo button on my iPad, so the lines look really forced and stiff. So this first week was actually kind of a moment where I realized, wow, my figure drawing has definitely improved in the past year. So moving on to week 2, we were still working with gesture, but we added in some landmarks and forms of the rib cage and pelvis into our initial gesture. So these are pretty similar to the first week, but now we're going that extra step to find the rib cage and pelvis. These are also a lot better than last year's, and this week I was trying to focus on improving my overall rhythms and alignments and getting the legs to flow better with the rest of the body. Alright, so week 3 is where we learned about the basic construction of a dress shirt and slacks, and what I thought was interesting was that we didn't learn about folds this week. So even though there aren't any folds here, we could communicate so much of what the figure was doing using just the basic seams and construction of the clothing. And a lot of the seams follow along the same gesture that we established in the first 2 weeks. So this week was kind of an interesting realization for me that you can get away with not drawing any folds and still get the idea of the gesture across, because things like the center line and seams along the side of the shirts and pants all communicate how the figure is oriented. And I learned that it's super common in animation not to have super complex folds because it speeds up the drawing process as well. So moving on to week 4, this week we finally started learning about the basic mechanics of folds. There are 7 basic folds, and we started with learning about the pipe folds and diaper folds. And the main idea of this week was that we're not trying to copy every single fold that we see. Folds usually emanate from a tension point, so we were first trying to analyze where the tension points were and connect each fold back to its tension point. So these little red points you see are actually the tension points that we first had to pick out. And this was definitely a challenging week because for me, I felt like I kept getting lost in the folds, but it definitely helped to think about the tension points and trying to relate everything back to the idea of gesture and form, and also trying to relate every fold back to a tension point. So first we started out by drawing drapery, and then from there we moved on to shirts and pants to keep things simple. And with the shirts and pants, we were also trying to get our folds to wrap in a certain way to highlight the cylindrical form underneath. And then in week 5, we kept working on shirts and slacks models. But we also introduced some new folds now, like the half lock and zigzag folds. Those folds you'll usually see around elbows and knees or wherever there's a bunch of clothing bunching up. And we kept practicing everything from last week as well and learning some tips and tricks about how to design the folds better. So for example, instead of drawing every single fold we see in an area, try to show like a big fold, a medium fold, and a small fold. And part of our homework was also trying to do some invented clothes figures. So down here, these 2 guys are invented. And I think this was a cool exercise because before this class, I feel like I wouldn't have been able to draw these at all without some kind of reference, without feeling like I'm just putting random lines everywhere, you know. But after drawing a few models, you do start to see the patterns of common tension point areas. So that was definitely cool to see. And then in week 6, we worked on medieval clothing, and we were no longer just focused on shirts and slacks, but really broadening out the scope in order to practice analyzing and creating our own clothing construction based off of what we're seeing. Because costume and clothing varies so much, there's no strict construction for all of it. So this week was more about getting a process to problem solve. And the first step involved creating our own construction of the medieval dress and doing various poses like the 3/4 front and 3/4 back view. And then in the second drawings, we were incorporating the folds into the drawing. And then at the end, we even did some invented figure drawings based off of the construction that we came up with. So these last 2 here are invented. And that was a lot of fun. And it makes you realize and appreciate that so much of the problem solving actually happens at the first step here, where you're not doing any folds and you're just creating the construction of the garment. Okay, so now week 7, we learned about the structure and construction of shoes. And shoes are more like object drawing as opposed to clothing folds, but they're also super complicated. And Kirk gave us the breakdown of how he thinks about shoes in 3 parts, and we studied different shoes from different views. And this exercise below was interesting because we had to pick a shoe to study, and then we had to draw that shoe on to the model, even though the model was wearing different shoes. So this was an interesting exercise in understanding what the shoe looks like from different angles and constructing it. And also, I just want to point out that these images that I got here are from the New Masters Academy reference library. So I want to give a shout out to them because if you have a library sub with them, they give you access to a huge reference library. And you can use these photos for professional work, and it's completely royalty free, and you're not going to get like copyright claimed or anything like that. I will definitely do more videos on NMA in the future because I think they're such a good resource and they have so much to offer. So then moving on to week 8. In week 8, we were kind of putting everything together and talking more about finishes and how Kirk would actually approach drawing something using line weight, tone, value, textures, drop shadows, and working in layers and zones. There was a lot of really valuable information covered this week, and a lot of tips in digital about how to save time. And this week was also a lot of fun to draw, although it was surprisingly time-consuming to do each drawing. But I was really pleased with the drawings I did this week, and I think this third one here of the lady in the fur coat might be my favorite from the entire class. So then in week 9, we were building more on the previous week and introducing shadows as another step in the rendering of our finished drawing. And these were also really time consuming, but a lot of fun and rewarding to have a more finished sketch at the end. And this was actually the last week of homework. And there was one more lecture for week 10 that Kirk uploaded on drawing stuff like props, but I haven't actually watched that lecture yet, so I think I'll go back at some point when I get the chance and watch that. Anyways, that was all of the homework I did for Kirk's costume drawing class. I feel like I gained a lot of confidence when it comes to drawing and inventing clothing, because now I have a framework to analyze and simplify clothing and folds, and I'm thinking more about the mechanics, structure, and gesture of the clothing and figure. And I think that's what Kirk is really good at as a teacher. He's really big on giving you a process to fall back on. I definitely recommend the class if you are considering taking the full participation option. Kirk is such an amazing artist and teacher, and he works in the animation industry, so I really enjoyed asking him industry and art direction related questions as well. Let me know if you guys like this kind of format where I go week by week, or if you like the more summary type videos where I just show a compilation of my homework at the end. I want to know what's more helpful to the people that are watching these types of review videos. Anyways, thanks so much for watching.